This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste. This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste. Tonight in Tweet Street Occupied Scotland, Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, thanks to some good PR and being where we're supposed to be when we say we're supposed to be. The follow-up to Buck Angel's cracking podcast last week. We're going to get a bit of an education tonight from LisaP2 and from ClaireLisaP2. So hope you enjoy it. Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, or Tweet Street Occupied Scotland. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. With me this evening is my co-host as usual, it's JB Whitesnake. All right, John, how are you doing?
Not bad, Peter. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well, mate. We are due to have Denise Finlay here in a cross-production with Scottish Free Media. However, she had, due to the very fluid political things that have been happening in Scotland over the past few days, she's been following other avenues of shall we say. She may join us later on in the show. The second part of a two-part special which featured Buck Angel last week about the trans ideology, trans movement, the Gender Recognition Act, etc. And our guest this evening, LisaP2, who you may or may not know from a story that broke in the press at the beginning of last month, and also ClaireLisaP2, who will go more into detail with just very shortly. But first of all, I'm just going to ask John. John, how's your week been since last week?
Not too bad, Peter. Just same old, just get through the usual challenges. So, ready to go.
Good, good. Well, first of all, I want to say hi to Lisa. Hi, Lisa, how are you doing?
Hi, not too bad. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask you, basically over the story that broke. First of all, I just want to bring in Claire and say, hi, Claire, how are you?
Hi there. Nice to meet you.
Hello. And yourself. Right, firstly, so we'll go with Lisa. Now, Lisa, there was a story in the press, and it was about, I guess it was about things that happened that shouldn't have happened at your university. Is that correct?
Yeah, Aberdeen.
Yeah. Can you tell us a wee bit about the situation, please?
Yeah, so basically I was in my final year as a law student, and I had a couple of modules I had to do, one of them being gender, sexuality and the law. So I went along not knowing what to expect, but expecting to learn something. On the first sort of couple of weeks, there was a lot of chatter, and into the second week, we were talking about women and what defines a woman. And I was explicitly asked, what would you define as a woman? And it was one of those moments, and I've said it before, it was one of those moments I sort of looked myself up and down, and I was like, well, a woman is a person born with a vagina and the ability to reproduce. And it became very toxic after that. People started, calling me names, shouting at me and things like that. And the subsequent weeks that followed, we were talking about transsexuals and transgender people and how they impacted sports. And I had said, it's not fair that a male-bodied person, a person born as a man, should be allowed to partake in mixed martial arts, for example, because I then cited the Fallon Fox fight and how she was born male and she transitioned at 32. So she had all the advantages of male puberty. And she went into the ring with a woman and fractured her skull, within 38 seconds. So as a law student, I'm told to evidence everything I say. So I did. I evidenced what I was saying and showed that I had an understanding of what I was saying, at which point I was muted. In the weeks that followed, I defended men because they had said, all men are rapists. And I was like, well, all men are not rapists. And again, I was blocked and I wasn't able to speak. And then I got an email saying that I'd been accused of inappropriate comments and I had to go along for an interview. So I didn't know what comments I'd made that were inappropriate, because in my head, I didn't say anything inappropriate, and I still stand by that. Nothing I said was inappropriate. It was all lawful and it was all evidenced. So I ended up going under a 2.5-month investigation about my inappropriate comments. The university didn't uphold the complaint in the end, but I mean, I was sitting my final exams, I was doing a dissertation, I was doing presentations, essays, and it was a stressful time alone without all of that on top of it. But the university twisted the narrative in the media, of course, and they said it was a conduct issue and it wasn't a free speech issue, when in fact it was absolutely a free speech issue, because the initial email that I got for the complaints going in was about inappropriate comments, nothing more, nothing less.
How did that make you feel, Lisa, to be known? Obviously, the outcome has been correct, certainly as far as I'm concerned. But how did that make you feel, having to go through all of that?
I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose my degree. I had worked really hard. I'd done 2 years forensic psychobiology to go into law as well. So I'd worked my socks off to get where I was. And the thought that that could all be taken away from me, I was terrified. And even like it affected everyday life. Like obviously I've got children. So I was trying to juggle studying with having children as well. And then I had this added pressure of this investigation on top of me. And I was terrified. The whole thing was, it was horrible. It was like you're trying to put one foot in front of the other and concentrate and just continue with life. And it's not that simple. You've got that threat hanging over your head. And I think the process was like worse for me than, like, obviously the outcome was fine. I got let off. But the process itself was punishment. I mean, it was awful. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating properly. I was struggling to do like studies and things like that. So it was a horrible, horrible time, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Yeah, and you still had then had to go through for your qualification. So you still had to I mean, that must have, it's hard enough having to do that without all of those side issues, but to then have to keep yourself alert enough to deal with that and still go through the full degree. Fair play, you have off. I mean, that it's challenging enough to get a degree without all that added pressure. So did that give you an extra star on the end of your degree once you achieved it? It should have done, in my opinion.
No, it didn't. The university were quite harsh with their marking, I think, due to obviously the reputation that I gave them.
I will put the target there, John. Have you anything you would like to add to it? Ask Lisa on that.
Yeah, have you had any further contact with the media after what happened?
No, I've not actually had any further contact with the media. I think there was a story from the Daily Mail. They did a story about me graduating to say that, you know what, she's gone through all this and she's still graduated at the end of it. Sorry, that's my dog. And she still graduated at the end of it. And that was the sort of last dealings that I had with the media.
Right, okay. Peter?
Wow. Right, so now I'm going to bring in Claire. Now, Claire, I was put in touch with yourself, or put in touch with each other, shall we say, by the Women Won't Wish, after the Women Won't Wish demo in Glasgow, and we've shared some emails. You've advised you've got similar concerns, and along with the silencing of women is the best way that I can put it. It's the way I see it. It's as if women's voices are trying to be hushed up. Would that be accurate as far as you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just a mother. You know, I've got 2 children. I'm not an activist. Well, I wasn't an activist, but you know, this issue is actually bringing out the activist in me, and not just me, but you know, many more women throughout the UK and further afield. And it was actually J.K. Rowling who alerted me to this issue, and she tweeted something about the Maya Forstater case, and that kind of piqued my interest. I was thinking, what's it about? And then once I delved into it, they say down the rabbit hole and you never come out the same. And I would say that is just so true, because once you start looking into what this ideology is all about, every single parent, especially every parent of, say, a non-gender conforming child, should be really concerned about what they're introducing to school and how this ideology is altering women's status in law, you know, that's a really important aspect of all of this. Women's rights are being removed in law. You know, a man in with a penis is not a woman.
Well, I totally agree with that view as well. I mean,
yeah, in law, that is coming. You know, that's coming. You know, we've got the Gender Recognition Act about to be introduced in Scotland, hopefully not, but that is coming. Well, and that is worrying. But I mean, my main worry is, as I've said to you previously, it relates to what they're teaching our children in school. I mean, obviously the women's issue is separate, but we're talking about children now being indoctrinated with this ideology. A lot of what they're teaching is actually running against what the government has advised it should be in school. You know, it's completely peppered with the word gender. There's hardly any mention of the word sex. Yeah. And they talk about like children being in the wrong body, pink and blue brains. I mean, it's like an advert from the 1950s. You know, it's almost like someone called up Nicola Sturgeon and said, hello, this is 1950s calling and please take my call. And she's taken it and she's run with it. You know, it's worrying.
That's exactly how I'm seeing it. I mean, I'm trying to look for reasons to think that I'm overseeing things. And the more that I look, as you say, the rabbit hole, the more that you look, the more concerning it is, the more worrying it is. I mean, if you look at the Education Secretary and her stance on trans rights, I've got a school-age child the same as yourself and Lisa, and it concerns me, especially when you see things like the background that I've got on just now, where they were advertising trans and drag for kids. And as you'll see, it's P5 to P7. I mean, I've got a kid who's in P7, and if there's anything that I feel that they should be aware of, it's a parent. I think it's a parent's responsibility. It's a parent's right, and it feels as though we're getting manoeuvred into a position where parents won't have a say in it.
Well, this is very interesting because I've got 2 children, and one child is 15 and one is under 10. And I had not realised this idea was in schools. And so my older child had already formed opinions when I found out what was going on, especially when I realised with Maya for starter. I did ask my eldest child if he knew what a transgender person was, and he did. And his take on it was that they are the most oppressed people basically in the world. This is what he's been taught. And, you know, and actually he kind of thought that I was being transphobic. I mean, if I had a pound for the amount of times I've been called transphobic, and I would like to state publicly, adults have every right to do what they wish with their bodies within the law. If anyone wants to, you know, feels so dysphoric that they want to alter their bodies and live as the opposite sex, I would never stop that. And, you know, I would, no one I've met in this movement has suggested that that should happen. People have a right to live freely and happily. But I think when you're introducing ideology into school that is suggesting to children that they may well be in the wrong body if they like things like pink and princesses, or maybe girls like, I don't know, football, which, you know, my youngest does, they might be in the wrong body. They're talking a lot about kindness, and then they actually talk a lot about, you know, abuse. I actually wrote to my school asking for details of the curriculum. And I would urge every parent watching to do the same thing. Have a look for yourself and see what they're teaching. They don't have to teach, I'm just wondering what it is. It's relationships, sexual health and parenthood. It's .scot is the website. You can have a look on there. That doesn't have to be taught in school. It's at the discretion of the head teacher. There's an organisation called Transgender Trend, which is run by Stephanie Davies-Arai. She's got over 20 years experience in schools. And she was so worried about this. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 7 years ago, she started a website called Transgender Trend. And she has developed guidance for school that is completely appropriate. It's biologically sound. It's appropriate for children. We should not be teaching children, frankly, to the level that they're being taught about transgender people. That is something for older children who maybe their dysphoria persists. I mean, certainly as part of the LGB teaching, you can add a bit on the end that explains that there are people, but it really just a few sentences, not a completely separate class dedicated to transgenderism. And that is what's happening at the moment. You've got LGB separate, then you've got a completely separate, and it's disproportionate, and I really don't think it's healthy. You only have to look at what's happening now. I think I know I read something, and there's a school, someone phoned into the LBC radio station, I think it was.
I'm just going to do a wee screen share on that while you're chatting there, Claire, so just keep on chatting. I'm going to do a wee screen share just in case you've noticed. On you go, carry on.
But basically, someone had phoned in to say that their 12-year-old sister-in-law had come out as transgender and was being supported through school. And she was actually the 10th child that year in that school. Now, if that does not, Paul, I don't know what it's going to take.
Yeah, I put that up on the screen just now. You'd shared that with me earlier, and I had done a wee bit of investigation to find what you shared with us. And here at CFO, following an interview with James Esses, an LBC scholar said that the school attended by his law. And I'm just reading that out. We said that is using a new name and new pronouns for her because they believe she's transgender. They've investigated, and she's the 10th child the school has done this to this year. Now, I presume that that's without prior knowledge of the parents. This is it's been initiated by the school.
I don't know any further than that. We'd need to, maybe James can shed some light on that later on, but I know that it does happen. A lot of the times, the first time the parent knows anything about it is when they're coming saying, I want to go on cross-sex hormones. And they're like, they're completely blindsided. And then if they don't just affirm, then they're classed as being transphobic. They can get social services involved. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, I keep pinch myself that we're in 2021. I mean, Lisa should not have had to have gone through what she went through at university for stating biological fact. Humans cannot change sex.
Nope.
They live as the opposite sex, and no one has a problem. This is a really safe country for trans and for transgender. I mean, transsexual, they're so dysphoric, they have to their body to live, and they have sex change and everything else. Transgender, I mean, you've got Eddie Izzard. He's got a different gender day of the week. How are you meant to legislate in law for this sort of nonsense? It's crazy. I just,
totally agree. Lisa,
I cannot be silent.
I'm going to bring you back on. What's your thoughts on what Claire's just shared with us and what we've just discussed there? Lisa.
Oh, sorry. No, I think it's appalling. I can't believe that we're introducing this to children. I've got an 8-year-old and a nearly 10-year-old. And I know when my 10-year-old goes into primary 6, I know a lot of this sort of stuff is going to be put upon him. And that terrifies me that potentially he could be, I can't think of a better word other than groomed into having this sort of thinking that if you don't like typical boy things, if you don't like, martial arts and football and rugby, then maybe you're a girl. Because for me, growing up, I was a proper tomboy. I grew up on the street with all boys. I qualified as a mechanic. So if somebody had come to me and said, you know what, maybe you're in the wrong body, and if I'd been of quite a vulnerable mindset, perhaps I would have actually said, well, you know what, you're right. And there's going to be a lot of young, vulnerable, impressionable children that are going to take this on and say, well, yeah, maybe I am in the wrong body. And going through puberty is quite a hard thing anyway for somebody to go through. You know, your body changes and everything, and you're not entirely happy with the changes you're going through. So I think for somebody to sort of say you could put that on hold and live as the opposite sex for a little while and, you know, put cross-sex hormones into a child and essentially sterilise them, is dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm just going to play a wee clip. This is a clip from last week's show. We spoke to Buck about similar issues. I'm just going to play this clip here.
So the one thing I would like to ask you, Buck, if you could have a 10-minute meeting with Nicola Sturgeon, who is the first Minister of Scotland and the current leader of the Scottish Government, what sort of chat would you have with her?
This is what I want them to see. I don't want them to see those angry, crazy people that are ripping stuff down because they want their rights. First off, that's not how things are changed. Secondly, if your government changes these laws to be so, it's going to kill your country. People are going to go in an uproar. They're going to freak out because it's not right, because there's no nuance there. It's like now everyone's trans, and we need to have a conversation and slowly change these laws. Yes.
Right, so no, I don't mind sharing this. I mean, I grew up, I have 3 sisters, 2 older and 1 younger, and I don't mind sharing this. At the teen years when you were going through puberty, etc. I mean, I was used as a dress-up doll with my 2 older sisters. Had leotards and had makeup and everything on, and for me, there was nothing wrong with that. That was a part of growing up, and kids have the option. And as Buck said in last week's show, I mean, if it's the case where it's so damaging to a child that that's really what they want to do, then have them live that way, have them be like that without taking all these medications, have them live as the opposite. When they go home, they take their hat off, they take their dress off, if it's a girl to boy, and take their trousers off, boy to girl, vice versa. And then after a concerted period of time, then allow them to reach a decision. I mean, I'm all for, as you had said, Claire, if an adult wants to do that with their body and that's what they want to be, then that's an adult's choosing. And I have no qualms with that whatsoever. And I'm quite sure, John, you're the same, that what we spoke about in previous shows and last week, yeah?
Yeah, much the same as what you say. I mean, things like it's also been in the media recently as well about Nicola Sturgeon saying about pregnant people. There's no, well, women are pregnant people. Let's look at pregnant people. Call me a dinosaur, but only women can be pregnant, and there's only 2 sexes. Now, that's nothing against people's rights, how to live as a man or a woman, or as whatever they want to identify as. But as Claire and Lisa's actually saying, kids are vulnerable, kids are impressionable, and they need to be let to live as bloody kids and let them grow up as kids. And that's, it could be so damaging to individuals to be possibly guided down a road that they don't know, they don't want to take in later life. So you have to be so careful, because once things starts changing for them, they could be changing to right their entire lives, and who's going to be responsible for that? And that could lead to big problems, for bullying, to God knows what else. So I would only say let kids be kids, for God's sake. And I would say the vast majority of parents have got their kids' best interest at heart, and they should be involved in all the decisions they make. Nobody should be making decisions outside the parental structure, and not include them, or even try to victimise the parents because they don't want to conform to what someone else thinks is the right path to take. So I'm all for letting kids be kids, let them grow up, let them have fun. Life's long and hard enough. Enjoy it. If you're lucky enough to have a good childhood, you should be able to enjoy it. No, think of it as something that's been destructive and potentially could destroy your life, because there's so many pitfalls, and even more pitfalls nowadays for young people as it is. Never mind when I was growing up, I didn't have any of these sort of worries about that, but there's so many pitfalls and things that kids can get into without an additional layer of something that could be highly destructive to them. So it's very, very concerning, undoubtedly.
Lisa?
Yeah.
Comments on that?
No, I agree with that. I think, you know, we've got an age of consent just now, and I think there's an age of consent for a reason. My children, like I said, they're quite young. They can't even decide what they want for tea most nights. They can't decide, you know, what films they want to watch at night. So how can we put a decision like what sex you want to be on them? They're not like of sound mind. They've not got the capacity to make these decisions. They're not old enough.
Yeah, totally agree. Claire?
Well, I watched the Black Angel video, and one thing that really struck me that he said is that puberty is a time of struggle, and you know, we need that. That's part of. Can you actually hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
hear you.
Sorry, because it froze, and I was like, "Am I going on here? No one's listening."
No, I'm still here. I've still got you.
You know, struggle, because they're obviously changing from children to young adults, and
Oh, sorry, that was me. Sorry, carry on, Lisa.
But this struggle that you go through, that's what builds resilience, that carries you through life, and you know, it allows you to cope with so much in life. And if we medicalize puberty for children by introducing really confusing topics, that really is that really what we want teaching 8, well, even younger, 7, 8, 9-year-old children, talking about, you know, so much emphasis on sex and sexuality. I've never known such emphasis to be on sex. I mean, I like sex, but at 6 or 7, I don't think I would have liked to have had this much knowledge. And we shouldn't be doing that. And I would actually like to just point out, we should be asking, why is there a 4,500% increase in girls identifying with their sex? Could that be linked to porn? You know, violent porn, you know, where you see girls. I've read so many things about problems in schools, and I believe actually someone just posted something about a website, and it's thousands of people have responded to a request for details about experiences in schools, and I believe there are many schools, some even in sort of Tayside and Perthshire and Fife, with real sexual abuse problems in our schools, and it's sort of violent porn, and I just think our girls just so afraid of what is expected of them sexually. That could really explain a huge part of this as well. Yeah. And you add the fact that people are saying, oh, you can change sex. No, you can't. And we should stop lying to children. It is creating very confused, very angry. I mean, we can see the people on social media. Those young people are so angry at us. And it's because we're telling them no. But, you know, we are saying no. We're going to say no today. We're going to say no tomorrow. And we'll be saying no next week. And for the rest of my life, I will be saying no to gender ideology in schools.
I totally agree with that, Claire. I've got a video I want to share. I mean, this is a pro Scotland, pro independence podcast that John and I have been doing. This is a video I wanted to share because this was the leader of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, after some of the younger members of the party were supposed to be leaving due to an issue with the NEC last year, and the message that she came out with. But I've edited it together with something that happened with LSE. So just to get your thoughts on that before we run out of time, really. So I'll play this here, and see.
Message from me as SNP leader on the issue of transphobia. I don't have much time for anything other than the fight against COVID right now, but on some days, silence is not an option. This message wasn't planned, it's not scripted, I haven't consulted with armies of advisors. That might be obvious, but what you're about to hear comes from my heart. Over the course of the day, I've heard reports of mainly young people in significant numbers leaving the SNP. I know many of you personally. I consider you friends. I've campaigned alongside you. You are a credit to our party and our country. It grieves me deeply that you've reached this conclusion after much soul searching, because you consider at this stage the SNP not to be a safe, tolerant or welcoming place for trans people. That's not acceptable to me. As SNP leader, I will do everything I can to change that impression and persuade all of you that the SNP is your party and that you should come home where you belong. Yes, we have differences of opinion on gender recognition reform. We should debate them openly and respectfully, but no debate can be a cover for transphobia. Trans people have as much right as any of us to be safe, secure and valued for who they are. Transphobia is wrong and we must treat it with the zero tolerance we treat racism or homophobia. Those are the principles I want to characterise the SNP and the country that I am privileged to lead. They're also the principles and values that I want to underpin the independent Scotland I've spent my whole life campaigning for. I don't support that as an end in itself, but as a means to a better, fairer, more just Scotland. Now, some will criticise this message, say it doesn't go far enough, or that the words are hollow unless we prove we mean them. I'm determined we will. No doubt others will accuse me of being woke. I don't care. Sometimes, particularly as a leader, it's vital to speak up for what is right and against injustice. That is why I'm posting this message, and I'm grateful to you for listening.
We go unnoticed, right up until the moment they scream for mercy. Am I a threat to you? Do I send chills down your spine? Picture this. I hold a knife to your throat and spit my transness into your ear. Does that turn you on? Are you scared? I sure fucking hope so.
So that was a wee mix of Nicola Sturgeon's message and also I believe it was a paper that was written and passed. They don't seem to mix the description that the First Minister's given it versus the description that this person is given it. Would you agree? First of all, I'll come to you, Lisa, and I'm going to push you a wee bit, so if you can give me a 30-second answer on it, please.
The message she's sending out to me is that she doesn't care about women. And obviously the second part of the message shows me that I think a lot of this stuff is dangerous. I mean, you're threatening somebody with a knife, you're spitting in their ear. That's revolting, that's dangerous. These people shouldn't be allowed to speak like that.
Totally agree. Claire, I come to you again, push you for a wee 30-second answer, please.
I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. What I would like to say is they talk a lot about abuse and they talk a lot about transphobia. And I wonder, what is the definition of both those terms in Nicola Sturgeon's mind? I agree with every word she says. Yeah, I would not, I mean, transphobia is, you know, just not allowing people to, and really hounding them and not allowing them to live a decent life. That is not happening in Scotland. That's not happening anywhere that I know of. And if it is, there are already laws in place that will protect people. So what is transphobia? Because as far as I can see, anyone that questions the trans sort of narrative is deemed as transphobic. And I would like to know what the definition is that I'm meant to judge both of those on. And really my final thoughts are, where are the adults? That's it. Where are the adults in government, in organisations? You have a responsibility to children that are coming up now. The SNP have lowered the age 16 for votes. Those people coming up will be like my child. They've been groomed essentially to accept this. And now you're coming for younger children. Soon, whatever we say will not matter because the young people will just accept it as part of life. And so we must step up now and do something about this.
Totally agree. Now, I'm going to try and leave it on a kind of a happier note. I mean, this was a video that was shared on social media today. It's been very fitting. So I want to try and play this in before before I do the close up, because I think it's quite an uplifting wee video. So it's about a minute long, so we'll play this. was courtesy of lightworks.com, that wee video there. For me, it's shown that currently the kids are all right. Now I can't go without mentioning what I feel is an injustice in the law here in Scotland, with the jailing of Craig Murray today for potential jigsaw identification. And again, it's a pushing one. So John, 30 seconds. On you go.
Yeah, it's concerning that he's been jailed. I don't think he should have went to jail. The other measures he could have took. But you've got the other side of the argument that says, oh, and as far as I understand, he could have deleted the offending tweet or the trending information, but even though someone else had put it out there as well. So he could have done more, and he shouldn't have went to jail. That's a simple fact. But what concerns me, Pete, is there's issues with people identifying with one thing, like him or whatever, and we need to be careful this isn't used to damage the independence cause, because independence is number one for me. And I think there's an element of people who will use any stick they've got to stop Scottish independence. And there's a lot of people masquerading as independent supporters who aren't independent supporters. They'll use any stick they've got to make Scotland look bad. And independence is number one for me. We can change everything with independence that's wrong with Scotland. We can't do it without it.
Right, Lisa, again, 30 seconds, please.
What about, sorry,
Just about your thoughts on Craig Murray and what's happened.
I think it was a bit of a harsh punishment for what he's actually done. I think especially when you contrast that with what happened with Joanna Cherry, and you know, the guy got told that he wasn't allowed to contact her for 5 years. I think it's a great injustice. There's nothing stopping him from contacting Joanna. He could still, you know, open another Twitter account or something like that. So for me, it's just an injustice being done.
Thank you, Lisa. Claire, again, 30 seconds, please.
I will be perfectly honest, and I don't know very much about this, so I would not feel qualified to comment. I did see the picture of him leaving his wife, and I read a little bit about his health conditions and things, and for that reason, I would say this is harsh, but I really am not the person to comment on that. But I certainly feel very compassionate towards any person who goes in when they feel they've done the right thing, and he's done nothing that would deserve a sentence like that as far. Okay, so I just wanted to add, because we forgot to mention two things. And the first thing, anyone that is confused about what this issue is about, I would urge you to buy Trans by Helen Joyce. It's fantastic, and it's a balanced, informative read. Buy it. And the last thing I'd like to say is tomorrow we actually see a man take to the world stage at the Olympics. The man is called Laurel Hubbard, and he is participating in state-sponsored cheating, as far as I'm concerned, by being allowed to compete as a woman. And he's actually taken the place of a woman who has probably spent her entire life training to get to that point. And I would just like to make that aware to everyone that's watching. That should not be happening. Keep women's sports. In fact, save women's sports. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant, Claire. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just to finish up, we want to give a shout out to For Women Scotland, to Marion Calder, to Marion Miller, to for all the witches and the Women Won't Waste crew. We're trying to have your back, so just a big shout out to you all. So I'm going to say good night. Claire, do you want to say good night to everybody?
Yep, good night. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Well, that's us really out of time for this evening, folks. I would like to thank you wholeheartedly, Lisa, Claire, John, as usual, from all at Tweet Street Occupied Scotland, Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, for Satirical Saltire, thank you very much, and we'll say good night this evening. Good night, folks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, as any keen followers of Scottish politics will know, Craig Murray was jailed today. First contempt in these islands, first contempt of court prison sentence in these islands in 50 years. The first in 70 years worldwide. First time ever for potential jigsaw identification. It's a slight on Scotland. We would love to have been able to discuss it more. Our guests this evening were honest enough to admit that they hadn't been keeping too close an eye on it, but we're going to look into it. We'll share our thoughts on this matter another time. Thanks very much for tuning into the podcast. To everybody at Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, to our satirical saltire, to JB Whitesnake, to Cinnamon Bridges, and for our guests, thanks very much and good night. This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste. This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste.